Friday Live every week at 8:30. We're live on LinkedIn and YouTube, as well as a recording for our podcast on humanising the world of work. So we're talking about what's been going on this week for us and our clients and our partners, and all the people we're talking to, and considering some of the things we're hearing in the press as well, and thinking about how that impacts the topic of humanising the world of work, which is really important to us. So really kind of trying to unpack that every week. It's a very rainy, miserable morning here in Sussex. And it's lovely to see you, albeit on the screen. I will see you shortly in the office. But how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I am good. I have spent the entire week trying to figure out how humans have evolved and still are allergic to grass, as my eyes have been incredibly painful all week. And you kind of go, how is that like not died out yet? Do you know what I mean? But otherwise, it's been a really good week. We had that great kind of midweek session with Arne Phillips, and we're talking about digital transformation and the role of humans in tech, and I loved that. We've had some really great projects, and everything seems to be focused on September, right? So a lot of decisions being made around, okay, well, we know we need to be supporting leaders. We know we need to be making some calls now. So let's push forward with some exciting projects, and let's experiment. Actually, let's just move forward and see whether this works. Let's tweak things, change things as we go. But yeah, so it's been a pretty busy week.
It has, hasn't it? It has, and still everything's changing. And I know everyone said it would be continuously changing and everything's uncertain, but it really is just every single day, isn't it? Everything is changing. Nothing is set in stone. And I've been really thinking about what that means for leaders, as we're working on leadership development programs, and thinking about, the difficulty that leaders have in being able to kind of be definite about something and give people clarity and give people hope and be with them where they are, and a little bit of preparation for what's to come, setting goals, etc. And yet they have to also then be prepared to retract all of that the next day and challenge all the assumptions that they made those decisions on, and admit any mistakes that they've made along the way and start again. And I'm like, God, this is truly exhausting change. And managing change, supporting other people through change is one thing, but I just, how are leaders coping themselves with the resilience of putting an effort into things, demonstrating their commitment and their engagement, creating followers, and then having to start again the next day. That must be remarkably hard.
Definitely. And I think this has been a theme right throughout our conversations, and that growth mindset being so important, but for leaders especially, because you've got to, if you're leading leaders, you've got to give them the empowerment to try new things that you may not have seen work before, or maybe you've seen fail before, but you need to let it go because this is a new world that we're living in. So leaders of leaders needing to give more kind of freedom to people, but then also leaders experimenting with their teams and kind of being a bit more free and openly suggesting that they don't know everything, and we need to rethink and work as a team. And we've talked, haven't we, about that continuous team experience being the difference in engagement, well-being, performance. Actually, we don't need to look at it as a whole organization. Sometimes we need to be focused on the team experience, and how do we give leaders the freedom to do that? And how do we give leaders the skills to do that?
And some kind of framework. I mean, it's like, making decisions in the dark, and it's really, really tough, isn't it? To then be able to, especially when people say, I'm nervous because I just feel like there's no certainty. Well, we have a plan. It's going to change. This is the plan. But maybe it's a case of keeping shorter term goals and focusing more on the weekly basis, even rather than the monthly and the quarterly, and kind of letting some of those bigger goals take care of themselves for a while, which is an unusual thing for me to say because I like to focus on the future. But, actually that is just disconcerting right now, isn't it? And one thing that struck me, I read something this week about how all this uncertainty is causing people to not know how they feel about things. And this was it just really caught my attention. I thought that's really interesting because, yes, if something is a certain way, or I hear a story and I think, oh yes, I disagree with that, or I agree with that vehemently, then I know how I feel about it. But when things are put out there and they say, actually, this is how it is today, but tomorrow it might change, and we haven't got all the clarity yet or the detail, and someone else thinks this, it's almost like you hold back because I don't really know how to feel about something that might not be the thing I think it is, that sounds really confusing. But that confusion of our own emotions, of how we feel about the constant change that's going on, kind of leaves you in limbo a bit, doesn't it? In terms of, like, I'm not quite sure actually how I feel about things. Someone asked me about something quite personal and important to me, and I literally responded to them and I said, I don't know how I feel about that right now, because I couldn't engage with the enormity of the context around the concept. It was a very strange thing, but I felt quite in control and quite calm when I said, actually, I'm not sure. I don't know how I feel about that right now. And I found that really helpful for me. Does that make sense? Does it sound like I'm
No, it does. And it's everything that we talk about around being human as a leader, but as a human being, showing that vulnerability and that authenticity. You weren't trying to show that you do know and you're okay and everything's going to be fine, which is the kind of common kind of misconception of what a leader should be doing. Actually, it's okay for a leader to go, do you know what? I'm not really sure how I feel about that yet. What do you think? What does everyone in my team think? What's the world saying? And then kind of, I guess having that openness allows you to go and seek out information and seek out to make an informed opinion, rather than just kind of going with I guess a generic opinion. And we're seeing that, aren't we, with a multitude of topics. It's not just the pandemic and the vaccine and all of those kind of topics at the moment. We're seeing it with everything: new working models, ways that we should be working, purpose. What direction should we be taking as a business? It's okay to go, do you know what? I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it. Let's think about it. Let's do some work on this.
And with the big stuff that's going on now as well. So there's quite a lot of, and it's a funny thing. I mean, it depends where you are at your stage in life and what your kind of friendship circle is or your life situation. But it feels like as some of the restrictions have lifted, there's quite a lot of normal things happening again now. But they're happening in a new context. And again, it's quite quite disconcerting. So, for example, I know I'm not the only one who had children going through exams last week and maybe still going through exams now, but in a very different way, with teachers marking things rather than being sent off. You know, some of my family members are moving house ahead of the end of June deadline. I know there must be lots of people in that situation similarly. You know, I know that there are people out there in hospital and can't be visited by relatives because of COVID. And it's all this very it's very interesting kind of seeing things open up and some things getting back to normal. Obviously, we're in Brighton. We're seeing a huge amount of people with the hot weather flocking to the beaches, and it makes Brighton feel quite normal again, like it was pre-pandemic. But there's so much stuff going on that is really, really not the same at all. And again, it's like that kind of disconcerting nature of how do I feel about all this right now? I don't know if I'm feeling it or I'm going through the motions, experiencing what's happening, and just keep going right now and see what happens next. You know, it's all unraveling, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a real danger with it, right? So negativity bias, we know, is the thing that kept us in caves because we were scared of the outside world, and it's embedded in our brains. It's core to who we are as a human being, and it comes out at its worst when we are uncertain of something or uncertain of how we feel about something. And therefore we look for social comparison and what's going on with my friends and my family. And people are very polarized in those decisions, right? Because they experience what the people around them are experiencing, which may be a biased group. So that's actually one of the ways to overcome that is to go and seek alternative views from all over the organization or from different circles, different organizations maybe. You know, how can organizations do more to to partner up with other leaders in other organizations maybe, or to connect and encourage, not networking because we can't do it, but maybe there's virtual events or some kind of program that are open and it's virtual that people can learn from each other on. That's going to be really important for people to make up their minds on how they feel about something. And it's okay to change it. We can disagree on something together, and have different opinions. It doesn't mean that I don't respect you. And respect, I think, is a really key, important part of our organization right now. We know it's the fundamental of the 6 pillars of high performance, right? If we don't respect each other's different opinions on how we feel about something, and recognizing that it might change, and that's okay too. That's your opinion today, but it might change.
Yeah. And that in an organization, that those opinions might be very strong and might be very important to you personally, but it might not change how the organization is doing things. And that's one thing that I have noticed. Obviously, we work with a lot of people in HR and people functions within organizations. And I know that they are coping with a very polarized opinion amongst employee groups, and people really wanting very different things coming out of this. And being quite strong and vocal and empowered about it, maybe slightly entitled to, but very much almost like there's an outpouring, isn't there, of what we want now, and a lot of media driven and fueled conversations going on about some of what the big companies are doing out there. I'm always keen to see what those big companies are doing. I think, they're the ones that have got the big bucks to be able to experiment and try things and do the research and let us know what's the right formula, what's the right setup. And I hope they're all doing that. But it's in the meantime, we're the people functions, the HR functions have been absolutely flat out through the whole thing. And now they're almost being the ones who have to take the power and the force of people's emotions when they're going through so much. And it's short fuses, it's very strong emotions, again, that are quite likely to flux and change, and maybe some things that aren't possible to actually change or influence. So there's quite a lot of consultation and engagement and explaining to do about what's possible and what isn't. But the hanging threat being that this, I mean, you've heard it before, and we've talked about it before, this potential great resignation that people are talking about. And I wonder if it's even a thing. I'm really intrigued to know whether it's actually a thing, or whether it's just that people have been sat tight for so long that there's lots of people who haven't moved that maybe would have done in the pandemic. But also, I wonder whether there's quite a lot of companies that are growing through what's happened and have done really well, and they're just literally growing as quickly as they can to meet demand. Or whether, it really is the fact that people are changing their minds about what they really want to do. And I guess, when you've been sat still in the same place, working in the same house, in the same environment, and you can't change your environment because you can't go on holiday and you can't do other things and you can't get back in the office or whatever it is you do, actually changing your work is probably one of the things you can do, isn't it, that helps bring a little bit of spice, a little bit of difference. So I wonder if that's almost fueling some people's ideas around moving roles as well, and whether we're going to see that coming up. Sorry, that was an awful long spiel of thinking, but I
think it's exactly right. And again, it feeds into uncertainty. When people are uncertain, they seek to control the thing that they can control, right? And one thing you can control is change your environment. What we are seeing, though, and I anticipate this coming out more in the next 6 months, is when you do move that role, and as I've said before, you go with you. So if your habits, if your behaviors, the way that you live your life, the way that you reflect on your positive emotions, the way you build relationships and connections with others, the way you seek meaning in every interaction that you do with your everyday task, if those things aren't happening and those skills haven't been built, you're probably going to be unhappy in your next role, because it won't be too dissimilar, maybe, in terms of it's hybrid, it's remote, maybe it's back at the office or whatever, but it might not be too different. It might be completely different, and in which case, fair enough. But I think a lot of the time it won't be entirely different. It might still be the same field. It might be the same type of job role, might be even with colleagues that you've worked with before, maybe. So yeah, I think that's going to be quite an interesting one in the next 6 months to keep an eye on. Have people moved, and when they moved, were they happier? Or
did it give them what they were looking for, or was it just the lack of a holiday and the lack of new stuff going on that
lack of new environment
to look at something else, and the ability to do so much more easily if you're working from home, to have interviews or to look at other roles online, etc. It's a really interesting concept, isn't it? I'm fascinated to see what happens over the next kind of 6 to 12 months and whether that truly is the case. And also, hybrid. How many times have I heard the word hybrid?
No, the worst one's return to work. I love this. Thomas keeps bringing me up on it every time. If you're watching, Thomas, it's not return to work. We've been working, but I guess it's return to work for those who are on. We need to be conscious that
there's a lot.
It means different things for different people.
Back to work, back to the office, back to the workplace, whatever it is. But yeah, there is a shift, and gosh, I mean, hybrid stuff. I mean, how much, to a certain extent, the delay restrictions till July the 19th is pausing things again. Every time there's an announcement, everything kind of goes a bit quiet. People work out what that means for them. But it buys a bit of time, doesn't it, again, for people to work out how to make this hybrid working possible. And I just keep thinking about the subconscious stuff that we just don't realize that we're missing. And I noticed it the first time we went back into the office, the first social meeting with people in the same room, even with masks and windows open and social distancing, it was just phenomenally different. And you don't realize, because you do have a subconscious ability to understand and feel and see the sides. That's what I'm kind of calling it, see the sides of what's going on. And that there isn't a way of pushing that into a remote way of working. That is the bit that's lost. And yes, we've made up for it in so many different ways, as you said, talking on Wednesday with Arne about it. But in terms of using technology differently and feeling that connection, but it doesn't replace the physicalness. And so, what is the right mix going forward? How are people going to get that? And I guess, how important is that to work? Does it mean that we're going to see this great divide between organizations that do and regularly and do well and are successful operating in a hybrid or a remote environment versus those organizations that really are solidly based in the office? What does that mean for industry? What does that mean for our markets, where actually some companies may choose to go down that route, and then in the future our choice is almost like, I'll either have the job that's got the remote option because that's what I need, but I know what I'll miss, or do I go for the option of the face-to-face office environment that actually I crave and I really want and enjoy, and for lots of different reasons. And I think there's going to be this great divide, isn't there? It's coming. And I think we've just assumed that hybrid is the one kind of way going forwards. But I think there's remote, there's hybrid, and there's office-based. And I think we're going to see three. And there's going to be a big difference between those. And that's where people will have a choice. People will have a choice about what it is that allows them to feel human at work.
It's really interesting, and I think it does come back to what you said right at the beginning around uncertainty, and what we have seen definitely across industries is this slowing down of decision making. So what model are we going for? We're going to wait until the big companies produce their kind of model, and then we'll see what works off that, and we'll make a decision off. And then the big ones have said what they're going to do, and now we'll maybe wait a couple of 6 months just to see what the reports are on productivity, and real slow decision making. I was listening to a podcast this morning on the way in, and they were saying this is the moment where values and your purpose should be the ones that are driving those decisions for you. And the purpose comes down to why does your company even exist? What are you trying to achieve? So for us at Bailey & French, we know it's humanizing the world of work. We made a conscious decision based on our family values of human connection and that those aren't written on the wall. That's just a feeling that you get when you come into this, this space with the people that care so deeply about each other. Family becomes just an obvious kind of way of working, right? Those things drove us to make the conscious decision to go, we want to be back in the office, and we're going to do everything possible to be safe within that office, but being back in the office and being with each other is what we want to be doing. And I think companies are just going to have to do that digging and make those decisions and be bold that those decisions aren't going to be making everyone happy, but you've made them for the right reasons at the right time. And it doesn't also mean, to your point earlier, it doesn't mean that might change later down the line. That's okay. That's the stance right now. But it's very aligned to our values and our purpose and what we're trying to achieve in our point of existence right now. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that clarity, that level of not quick decision making, because I don't think that was a quick decision that we made, but it was a conscious, intentional decision, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and there's also that piece that, I look at what some of the other organizations are doing in terms of setting up hybrid working and communications around things changing.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I hear, there really isn't any pleasing everyone.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they do to try and fit every single person's wants and needs. There's people that aren't happy. And that doesn't mean the company isn't humanizing the world of work. That doesn't mean the company isn't living by values. It means that they have to make decisions at the end of the day about the company's future. And it's that company that also then provides the roles for people's livelihoods. And there's so much complexity in it that it's oversimplified in the media and blown up with big headlines that then, because we're forced to look at the media for updates on the news that are affecting our lives, we're much more affected by some of those other news headlines that sit alongside. And I think that's worrying, really, because it's leading people to be very polarized and very quite angry. There's a lot of anger in the news at the moment, isn't there? I mean, I see obviously that there's particular words that are used repetitively, and it feels heavy. It feels hard to get through that and to just sift through what's the information I need and then switch it off and get on with, okay, what's going on in my life and my context right now? I can't control what's going on in the world. I can't control all those big things. I can listen to it and see, but let's just take some time, as you said. And I think that time, that patience of being able to say, this isn't how it's always going to be. This is going to, flex and change continuously. And as uncomfortable as that is, let's see what we can learn and grow from it. Simplistic and easier said than done, I must say, because I feel it myself, and even changes that I'm making and deciding on, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'm not even sure I want to go through that, but it's just that it's about, how do we get through this? How do we keep going? How do we try and enjoy the ride? I've seen some of the funniest conversations in the last 2 weeks at work that I've ever seen. And it's so brilliant. As I said before, it really breaks the kind of like the heaviness of what's going on. And it's just brilliant. And it's lovely to see people relaxed enough to be able to joke around and just take it, oh, well, that's how it is, and it might change tomorrow. But bringing fun back into the office for me, bringing fun back into our work, in whatever way we're doing it, is so paramount right now to help people, with relieving that stress. We talk a lot about the physical wellness, but that playfulness, I've talked about it before, but it's so critical. It's absolutely brilliant when we get it. And I've noticed every time it happens, it's almost like a ripple across the team. You can see people online sending gifts and jokes to each other, and it creates that cohesion, that point of connection, that point of it's all okay. Yes, we're all working hard, but actually we're all humans too, and there's lots of other things going on in our brains all the time. And we talk about this, don't we, the kind of platforms for cohesion, and how do we as humans
to deepen and strengthen our connections together. And it might be as simple as sending a little GIF on a Monday morning to say, I'm thinking of you, you know, because I'm sending you this hilarious GIF that means something to us. Do you know what I mean? And those little points of connection is, I think, where technology plays a role. And we were talking about this on Wednesday with Arne, and if anyone hasn't watched that, I'd go back and have a look, because I think it was brilliant. And it's exactly that. It's, let's do the human stuff. Let's do the things that matter to us as human beings. Let's think about it. Let's create those behaviors, those skills that aren't, you know, they don't come naturally, funnily enough, as human beings, because there's so much kind of corporate, and this is how you should be, and here's a great leadership book, and this is what you should look like. There's all of those kind of pre-schemas and pre-perceived ideas of how we should be. We need to kind of start stripping that back and using this opportunity to do that, and then applying the technology to further deepen and strengthen those connections with others. Yeah, it's a tough one though. Doesn't happen overnight. No,
it certainly doesn't, does it? And it's it's fascinating seeing it when it does happen, but it's quite tough.
Yeah, it's a balance, isn't it? Again, and this is one thing that we've spoken about time and time again. It's the balance of well-being and performance. And again, people raising the question now around performance management and how, okay, well, you know, particularly actually public sector, interestingly, you know, not being seen to spend public money on fluffy things like well-being and mindfulness, really important things, but I guess you've got more freedom when you're a private sector organization and you haven't got that public perception. I don't know.
The scrutiny is really important.
The scrutiny is really important, right? And outside perception.
But I think
all those things are a balance. And actually, how can we bring well-being into our new world ways of working? You know, how our team experiencing well-being not as a separate thing that you do, but in our everyday interactions, how we build in better question sets, checking in with each other, ways of working that reduce stress anyway. So then we don't need a kind of fully mindfulness, take everyone out for 5 weeks intervention. It's part of who we are and how we work. I think that's going to become ever more important in how we think about our performance management.
Yeah, and it's easier and quicker. So in terms of productivity and looking at it from the data, you know, actually, when we're more comfortable with conversations, we spend less time preparing, we spend less time worrying afterwards, we spend less time with impact on other conversations around the conversation we need to have. So when we're confident and comfortable with those conversations and they're part of the day-to-day, then yes, it happens much more fluidly and more fluently in a way that actually doesn't get in the way of other things. So there is a huge increase in productivity when leaders, particularly and managers, have the capacity and the capability to be able to blend more difficult conversations into the day-to-day, and they don't feel like they're shying away from them, because we as naturally, you know, we avoid conflict. Some people are more empathetic than others, but, you know, really worry about having some of those hard conversations, and the worry that builds up days in advance can actually really reduce our productivity and our performance massively. So making sure that we take ownership for that, dealing with things in the most immediate way we can, is the thing that has the least impact on our overall performance too. So absolutely upskilling and increasing our capability around those areas is critical. So we're on 29 minutes already. So we've been talking for half an hour about so many different things, and I feel like I've got a right diatribe of lots of stuff. So I've really enjoyed talking to you today. And Sally, thank you for joining us, and anyone else who's watching now or watching the recording. It's always good to reflect on where we are right now, stay in the moment, stay focused on what's important, and how things are really humanizing work. There's a lot of hard work and effort going on right now to ensure that people are okay. And we mustn't forget that, because even when we don't agree with what's going on, actually, we know people are really trying so hard, and it is a really tough role being in that situation where you're a guardian of the human experience, and that's critical right now. So Yes, I'm really interested to talk about human experience. Human experience directors, we should talk about that next week, Ant.
We should. Yeah, that was a really interesting point from Anne, wasn't it?
Are we looking at the rise of a human experience director? We'd love to hear people's thoughts on that. So until next week then, Friday Live, next Friday, 8:30 GMT, here again on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Please listen in afterwards if you can't make it on time, but we'll be inviting some more guests in over the next few weeks. So hopefully join us. Have a lovely weekend and week ahead of you. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks, Ant. I'll see you shortly after my second jab.
See you in a bit.